Hello and welcome to a episode of, let's call this Bera Basics. This will be on the basic things that you want when you're first starting to learn how to cook and setting up your kitchen. So, I have a fairly well-stocked kitchen just by the dint of collecting stuff over a period of time. But not everyone's in the same situation that I am. So what are the essentials? What are the basic things that you need in order to start cooking and have the right tools on hand? And when should you buy certain things? That's what I'm hoping to answer for some people in this video. So, one of the first things that you need to get is you need to get a chef's knife. Now, the type of chef's knife and the size of chef's knife depends on what type of cuisine you're planning on doing and how large your hands are. So, I started off with this chef's knife right here, which is a very basic, fairly cheap chef's knife. It's decent length, fits comfortably in my hand, is nice and lively in my hand, but that's because I have a fairly large hand. If you don't have a large hand, don't go for the 8s, 9s, and 10-inch knives. Go for something smaller, more manageable. The 6s and 7s are probably more the size for your hand. If you have large hands, then typically a large knife works better for you. Now, this isn't always the case. There are people that prefer a small knife despite large hands. There's people that prefer large knives despite small hands. So ideally, if you can go someplace where you can actually pick up the knife and see how it feels in your hand, that works wonders. And I recommend, if you have the choice of one good knife versus a knife block, one good chef's knife is the way to go. So I have 3 of my earliest chef's knives here. 2 European chef knives, and then what some people call Japanese chef's knife. Its proper name is a santoku. So, these 2 are probably the lowest quality of my first 3 chef's knives. This one's a good one. It's nice and durable. Nothing fancy about it. It was also rather cheap, but it's a good knife for a fairly modest price. So you definitely want to start with a chef's knife. Now, if you're more into normal American cuisine or European cuisine, you typically want to go for a European chef's knife. You don't have to, but you typically will go for a European chef's knife. And these are both really good examples of standard European chef's knife design. So you have a blade that starts off fairly wide, doesn't taper for a little bit, but then starts to fairly sharply taper, and it goes in towards the point on both sides. This is a good all-purpose knife. That rounded bit is to help as you're working through something. You can rock your knife. It's the common chef's knife in the West for damn good reason. It can be used for just about anything. Now, you can get more special-made knives. So, for example, I have my actual butchering knife. This one is more purpose-built. It's nice and long to get a nice, even slice as you're going through meat. And it just feels amazing in the hand as you're trying to butcher. Most people don't need to get a special butchering knife. So that's something that you'll have to decide if you want to get that later on. You do want a chef's knife. Now, this is a Santoku. This is a Japanese chef's knife, as many people will phrase it. There's also a Chinese chef's knife. I don't have one of those yet. I'm going to be getting one. The Chinese chef's knife kind of looks more like a cleaver almost. But the Santoku has this very rounded front to the knife, and it's pretty much level on one face with that nice curve, whereas on a European, it starts off, like I said, about the same length for a good 2/3 of the blade almost, and then it'll start to curve towards the tip from both sides. Santoku, you only get that curve on one side, and it is a far more aggressive curve when it starts curving. Let me turn my light a bit so that you guys aren't blinded by that glare. So, with this knife, actually let me flip it the other way because that is a bit too dim. The Japanese chef's knife, the Santoku, again feels really nice in your hand. This one is a 7-inch Santoku. It works for me. If I had a bigger one when I was first going to buy my knives, I would have gotten a bigger knife than the 7-inch, but 7 was the largest that they had. This one, I can't really complain too much. The painted blades aren't my favorite. You can get ceramic blades. This isn't a ceramic. This is a steel that is just painted with that green paint to prevent it from rusting. I'm not the biggest fan of painted blades, but it's an aesthetic thing. If you don't mind them, you can use them. They're perfectly fine. They do their job. Sometimes the steel isn't as good quality, and that's what I was saying by this knife is probably the best of these three. And then handle, it's all about what feels good in your hand. Triple rivet is a fairly traditional handle. I like it because it's a full tang knife, and it's a nice meaty tang, so that puts a fair bit of the weight of the knife in the hand and back of the knife, rather than it being up front. So the balance point of this is really right at the front of the handle, and it flares up to prevent your hand from slipping as easily. So that's what your first purchase should be. A good knife. Doesn't have to be an expensive knife, though. Knives are very much, for the most part, one of those things that you get what you pay for. So, more expensive knives tend to be better than cheaper knives, but this knife was cheap. All three of these knives were cheap. I still use them, even though I have a really nice knife block set now. But that's just personal preference and how abusive you are. Some of these blades have a little bit of a ding. The one thing that's really nice about the Santoku is it did come with its own sheath, which that's handy when you don't have a knife block. These can be a bit dangerous because these just get shoved in a drawer. So the next couple things are related to the knives. You need to get a good cutting board. Now, the type of cutting board, there's a bunch of different types. All of them have their positives and negatives. You can get a full-blown butcher's block, which you want an end-grain butcher's block. It is very durable if treated right, but it's a bit of a pain in the ass to clean. A lot more difficult than something like this. So, these cutting boards, they're fairly cheap. This is just an Epicurious cutting board. It's mostly blade resistant, but you can see over the years, I'm slightly scoring this just from using my knives every day on this cutting board effectively. But they're cheap, they hold up well, you can wash them in a dishwasher without an issue. So, it's nice for that. The butcher block, a lot easier on your knives than even this. This is easier than a plastic board. I do have a couple plastic boards. I don't like them. They tend to be rough on your knives. And when you score the surface of the plastic board, it allows bacteria to get in and just nest in your board effectively. This doesn't really allow bacteria. The butcher's block effectively smothers bacteria. And then you have bamboo boards, which, depending on how they're made, they can be a bit rough on knives. But they're kind of an in-between between this type of board and a butcher's block. They are a bit rougher on knives than this one is, depending on how they're made again. If you see a lot of the, side swellings that almost not of bamboo in the board, that's rough. But they can be washed fairly easy. They don't have any real bacterial problem. They're good options. It's just personal choice. Moving on from the boards and the starting knives, you need a sharpening steel. And you need something to sharpen. It can be something simple like this, or you can get full-blown whetstone set. I am going to be getting a full-blown whetstone set. My old one kind of wore out. But sharpening steel is for your daily honing of your knife. So right before you're about to use it, just take it at the about 15-degree angle and run your knife along the sharpening steel. It keeps the edge honed, makes it a bit easier, because the most dangerous tool that you'll ever have in a kitchen is a dull knife. Same thing for the sharpener, only this isn't a daily, this is a weekly or monthly or semi-monthly rather use. So once every other week, once a week, or once a month, depending on how much you're using your knives. The more you use your knives, the more often you'll need to sharpen them. So that's the starting cutlery. Now, you can choose to expand from there. And what I would do if you buy a fairly cheap chef's knife is your first large purchase for your kitchen, go for a more expensive chef's knife. Sorry about the glare there. Go for one that is a higher quality. These are both really good. These are Chicago Cutlery chef's knives. Again, a Santoku and a normal European chef's knife. Absolutely beautiful. Cut amazingly. Again, I still hone the blades and I still sharpen them. But they hold an edge nicer than these two by far, and a little bit better than the highest quality of the cheap ones that I showed. So they are worth it. But you don't need to get these right away. You can start with a bit of a cheaper one. Just know that you're getting what you pay for. Then you can also move to specialty knives. So a butcher's knife, or a meat cleaver, or vegetable cleaver. The difference between a meat cleaver and a vegetable cleaver is the weight to them. This is kind of a utility cleaver. It's a little bit in between the vegetable and meat cleaver. A meat cleaver will have a really thick spine to it, and it'll taper a bit, but not all that much. And what I mean by the taper is, let's see if I can get this. There you go. You see how the spine is a lot thicker than when you get towards the blade. A sharper taper will be for your vegetables or your meats without bones. A much more gradual taper, where the knife stays thick for longer, that's for your meats with bones in them. That would be a full meat cleaver that is meant to be used with bones when it's a really thick spine, and oftentimes they'll have a butcher hang, a hole towards the top of the blade on the backside that was used to hang the butcher's knife, because you keep these very sharp, and it was a way of keeping them out of the way in a butcher's shop while still keeping them handy. So you can go for more specialty knives, but 90% of your cooking can be done with just a good chef's knife. Or 90% of your cutting, rather. So that handles the cutlery fairly well. And like I said, first you want to improve the quality before you go for an improved selection. The one exception is get a bread knife fairly early. Bread knives do wonders on bread. Don't use a bread knife for anything else other than bread. It is a very specific, purpose-built knife. But slicing through bread with a chef's knife is a bitch, and you mash it, it is horrendous. So, next stuff. The next most important thing is a good skillet. I recommend getting a skillet that is oven safe. This is, of course, one of my cast irons. This one, the bottom of this is actually really smooth, despite how the camera is making it look, which that's just from years and years of use and cleaning and seasoning and re-seasoning and use and treatment. It eventually smooths out. This is a Lodge skillet. Lodge sells what would be called unfinished bottom cast iron. They're seasoned, they work right out of the box, but their bottom's a bit rough, which can cause certain things to stick. But over time, it softens up, it smooths out, and it becomes an amazing skillet to use. There are also skillets that are generational skillets. You can pass this down from you to your children, to your children's children. They can keep going as long as you treat them right. And that's kind of the same thing with everything. You need to treat it right. You need to clean them right. Don't stick your knives in a dishwasher. Clean them by hand, dry them by hand, make sure that they're entirely dry before they go back in a knife block. And if you really want to be good to your knives, oil them. And you want to keep your cast iron oiled as well. This skillet is one of my oldest skillets. Not my oldest skillet. I actually have one that I did inherit recently. But this is an amazing tool. The heat retention is fantastic. The utility of this thing is amazing. Goes in the oven, goes on campfires, goes on grills, goes on stovetops, gas, electric. The one thing is, if you have a glass top stovetop, you cannot use cast iron. It's the thing that makes me hate glass top stovetops. But this, you treat it right, it'll last you a lifetime and then some. So you want a good skillet. Really, if you go for a cast iron skillet, you want two good skillets. I do say go for a cast iron. One of your skillets, the cast iron, one of them, a good deep skillet that is not cast iron, because there's certain things that are a pain in the ass to clean out of cast iron. And these will become a bit charactered as you use them. It'll start off ridiculously shiny at the bottom, but it'll pick up some color. You can get rid of that with a vinegar and then baking soda wash technique. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't harm the skillet. It just adds character. I don't bother with that. So this is, again, if you're going for European cooking. You want to get skillets, and I recommend getting 2 skillets, 1 cast iron, 1 non-cast iron. If you're going Eastern, especially Chinese cooking methods, then of course you go for a wok. And again, this is something that gets that character to it. So this looks a bit red to my camera. That is not red. It's a deep brown, just because of the cooking in the bottom is almost a blued black. And again, that's something that is really standard with woks. They do end up getting colored as you use them. The blue-black is fairly normal. And the longer you use it, the more that blue-black area kind of expands. This is fantastic. I recommend getting one with a nice long handle. It makes it a lot easier. And getting one with an assist handle, which is what you call this, is really nice, because if you have a lot of food in it, you can use that assist handle to help lift it. This is really good. You can get a cast iron one. You can get what's called a cooking iron, which is a really high carbon steel, actually. You can get a stainless. Just don't get a non-stick. And don't get a non-stick for your skillet either. Non-sticks are... they have a use, I guess, but you have to be really careful with the temperature. You have to be really careful with a lot of different things. So just don't like bothering with non-stick. Now then, another thing that you'll want to get is something deep. For me, one of my most often used deep vessels is my Dutch oven. This is, again, full cast iron. It's smooth from age. It is an amazing tool. Holds up ridiculously well. It is fantastic. I love cast iron. But this will allow you to do a lot of roasts, because this is a nice big one. It's over 12 inches, or it's about 12 inches, maybe a little bit more than 12 inches from side to side. And it will allow you to roast nice large pieces of meat. You can do some baking in it. You can do a hell of a lot with just a good cast iron Dutch oven. It's fantastic. And, of course, a really good deep sauce pot that's not cast iron, also a really good option for a deep vessel. I like this because it can go in the oven, and it can take the place of like 12 different things, from a casserole dish for baking to loaf pans if I'm just making a bowl, and baking trays and roasting pans. This takes a lot of different things and puts them all in one beautiful, easy to use, durable thing to get. So Dutch oven's a fantastic option. You can also just get a deep pot, and if you have the money, get both a Dutch oven and a deep pot. Use this for your roasting, your baking. Use the deep pot for boiling water for pasta. So that's another item that I'd say is pretty much a kitchen essential. And then if you can, just a baking sheet. With these few simple things, you can do 90% of what I've done on my channel thus far. And a hell of a lot of cooking beyond. They're simple things, but they have the most uses. You can expand on this really easy. You can get more pots. You can get more pans. Oh, I forgot. Get a nice pot. A medium-sized sauce pot. Here, let me grab mine. Just a good medium-sized sauce pot. This will allow you to make a lot of soups. It'll allow you to make sauces. It'll allow you to boil small bits of pasta and whatnot. It's a really good all-purpose kitchen tool again, so you want to get this. And then, as far as preparation of food, you also want at least one good mixing bowl. And I would say get 3 mixing bowls. A large to medium one like this one. A small one. And if you want to bake, get a really large one. Those 3 sizes should handle most of what you need, because it will handle letting your dough rise when you're baking bread. You can use it as a bowl to mix your salad in. You can use it as a bowl to mix up various sauces, mix up batters, all kinds of things. Just a good trio of bowls. As you go, you can get more things. You can get loaf pans, but those additions really depend on what type of cooking you're doing, because there's a lot of specialized kitchen equipment. If you find yourself doing a lot of baking, get loaf pans, get other bakeware, get glassware, make sure that it's Pyrex or some other glassware that can take oven temperatures. Get that and use that to do your baking and your lasagnas, your casseroles, and everything like that. If you're doing a lot of sauces, get more than just the one saucepan. Get a selection of sizes, small ones, medium ones, large ones. If you do a lot of rice, get a rice cooker. Trust me, get a rice cooker. I'm not a fan of single-use tools for the most part. The rice cooker is a massive exception because, god damn, it makes rice easy, and every time the rice comes out. I also have an Instant Pot, and I have a sous vide machine. Those are later investments, but those do absolutely wonderful things. Here, let me get my sous vide. It's just a simple immersion circulator. I need to clean it with vinegar again because I have a bit of hard water issue, so my immersion circulator gets some lime scale. And mine is getting a bit old, so the back plate has broken off of it. But this thing does wonders. It allows me to cook my food to the exact level of doneness that I want it without any problem. And like I said, if you get one of these and you notice this white residue, you get white vinegar. You do a 1 part white vinegar, 2 parts water in the vessel that you use your immersion circulator in. You run it for as long as it takes to get to 180. Then you turn it off. You let it cool down. You pull it out. You just give it a wipe. And all of that calcium deposit and hard water deposit goes away. The coils will also sometimes get that, depending on how long you're running it, and if you've cleaned it recently. Again, same thing. Vinegar, water, and it will clean itself. These are amazing. I love it. If you have the money and you're really into cooking, get a sous vide machine. You'll love it. It cooks everything beautifully. So to avoid making this video too long, I think I'm going to cut it off here. But again, I'm just going to recap. Start with a good knife. Doesn't have to be the most expensive knife, but get a good knife. Make sure that it fits your hand. Make sure that it's nice and lively in your hand. You don't want it too big. You don't want it too small. You want it to fit your hand well. Get a good cutting board, sharpening steel, and some type of sharpening system, whether it's whetstone or a little sharpener system like this. Get good skillets that will last you a long time. Don't get non-stick skillets. Non-stick skillets are absolute garbage. You can get ceramic ware, you can get stoneware, you can get just a good steel skillet, cast iron. Any of those are beautiful options. The food comes out amazing. Go for one of those. Don't bother with non-stick. You can't stick them in the oven. You can't take them to too high of a temperature. Go for something that's durable. Go for something that lasts. Go for something that you can... that's forgiving if you screw something up. It's hard to completely ruin a cast iron unless you soak it in water for an extended period of time. And even then, you get steel wool, you scrub the ever-living hell out of it, get the rust off of it, re-season, it works. It's still good to go. You take a non-stick up to too high of a temperature, that non-stick's dead. There's no saving it. The non-stick coating ends up peeling or getting scorched and just doesn't work anymore. Don't deal with non-stick. Get good pots, good equipment. You don't need all that much equipment to make fantastic food. You don't need to spend a lot of money to make fantastic food. You can do it with fairly simple things. A chef's knife, a cutting board, a good cast iron skillet. That's the bulk of my food that I've shown you, and a hell of a lot beside that. That's all you need for a kitchen. Well, I'll do one of these videos again later if you guys want, of the step up from the basic, beyond just the things that I've mentioned in this. And I'll go into more detail for that, but until then, try something new. Explore your food. Get a different salt, get a different sugar, try a different dish. Enjoy your food, enjoy your life. Have a good one all.